Welcome to the Mox Life Show. We are here with the incredible JJ Peterson from Storybrand. I know many of you have heard of it. If you have not, you're going to want to look it up because it is a game changer. And, you know, JJ, you have worn so many hats at Storybrand, and I believe you've been there since the beginning. So I'm not going to give you a title other than an integral part of Storybrand.
I think that's appropriate.
Is that appropriate? Yeah, I think so.
By the time people see this, it may be a different title already. So.
Right. So let's not keep it focused on one thing. But I want to give a little bit of background on why I am so incredibly, insanely excited to have you here. So Storybrand has their own podcast, and it's called Storybrand. And Donald Miller is the other host. But JJ is the co-host. And I have been listening to it for about 2 years. And I was telling JJ before we got started, I'm religious about it. Every Monday, I look forward to it. I know it's going to be there. And I listen to it every single Monday. And it just starts my week. It kicks off the week on a positive note, which I talk about all the time. That positive mindset. And so it's such a pleasure to have you.
Well, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And I'm very jealous of the background behind you.
Sorry. My office was down today because of the internet, and so I'm
I don't mind.
At Kendall Jackson with a little wine. So
I've got my tea with to join you.
So let's jump in. Tell me, you know, JJ, when I listen to you on the podcast, you've done a number of things. You have a number of degrees. You've coached little kids. You do hit them with the baseball, so I think you've been demoted from.
Well, careful about how you set that up. Listen to the podcast. You'll hear the story. It's not intentional. I do not hit you. Do not get me in trouble.
Okay, sorry. I didn't frame that very well. So tell me a little bit about your background. I know that you've jumped around, as so many of us entrepreneurs have. So give us a little background on yourself.
Yeah, so my background is varied. I've always been involved in some form of communication, teaching, entertainment kind of world. So my undergrad was in public relations, and I really got into public relations primarily because there was a nonprofit that I loved, and I literally asked them, what do you need help with? And they said, we need somebody to be public relations. So I switched my degree and went into public relations. And so did public relations and marketing for a couple international nonprofits for a number of years. But I always kind of had this desire to be creative and do entertainment. So through that, I started doing improv comedy on the side, actually, and was in San Diego at Comedy Sports, and then got into some television and film things, and then ended up going back and wanting to teach that. So I ended up getting actually a master's in theology and the arts, so a study of the story of humans' interaction with each other and with the other. So with each other and the other, and what that looks like in film, television, music. And I wanted to teach that. I wanted to teach people how to tell better stories about interaction with relationship and all of that. And so I did that for a while. I was a college professor. Little tidbits. I was in a Missy Elliott music video. I danced nested with Missy Elliott in King-a-Ling. If you go look up King-a-Ling, you will see there's a whole story. So I have a million stories of things that I've just been involved in over the years. And I think to the outside, maybe in particular my mother, it felt like I was jumping around a lot, that I was kind of like moving from career to career and not really settling down. And it never really felt like that to me. For me, it was very kind of entrepreneurial and following my passion and seeing kind of what that next thing was that kind of engaged my gifts and talents further. And there were many times that I just took big risks. You know, I would leave. I was joking with my family that not that I was ever rich, but I made and lost a lot of fortunes over my career, you know, in the sense that I would kind of build up, I'd own a home and I'd build kind of everything up. And I go, no, I'm done here and I'm ready to move. And I would sell everything, go on the road or do something new. And I was just kind of always following passion and purpose, really, in all of those things. Whatever I got involved with, I said, as long as I can trust the people that I'm with and I believe in the mission and the cause behind it, I'll sweep floors. I'll do anything and I'll build something in that.
Can I pause you for a second? Because I want to elaborate on what you just mentioned.
I think that, I kind of, even in the biggest moments, I would always weigh what's the worst thing that can happen here and what's the best thing that can happen. And I tend to be a little bit more of an optimist and be willing to bet on myself a little bit. Yeah. And so, for me, especially when I was younger, it was, well, the worst thing that can happen is I move into my parents' house or my friend's house and live on their couch for 6 months till I figure this out. Like, that was always, I didn't have a family or kids. So it wasn't like I was putting their livelihood at risk. It was literally, okay, what's the worst thing? I'm embarrassed that what I tried to do didn't work. It always came down to what the worst thing that could happen is my ego would be bruised. And I had to actually say, that's going to be okay. Like, I would rather fail and have people know that I tried than never have gone for it. And that came to fruition. That came really important when I actually went into improv comedy and toured for about 4 years professionally. Same thing, sold my house and went on the road and started doing stuff in Hollywood. And I never made it huge, but I made a living doing it. Yeah. And then I went back into education. And when I left education, I worked my way up to be dean of students of a college. And I signed a contract with a production company to create a reality television show for my brothers and I called Bad A Brothers. And the premise was that my brothers and I are so not bad A that we can't even say the word. And we would travel around the United States and find those old, weird, quirky laws that are still on the books, like you can't cross the Minnesota border with a duck on your head. And we'd research the history behind those and we would break those laws. So here I am at a university. I've worked my way up to being in administration. I'm making the highest salary I've made. My living expenses are covered. I'm also doing acting in Hollywood on the side. I'm kind of living that dream. And this opportunity came up to start a television show. And it was one of those moments where I was like, okay, what is the worst thing that could happen? I move in with some friends. And my ego is bruised because I gave this up to pursue something else. But I always knew that I bet on myself that I could land on my feet somewhere. And so I did. I actually pursued that television show. We signed with a production company. We filmed sizzle reels. We kind of got through the whole thing, got in the room with a bunch of networks, and then it never got off the ground. But because I took that risk is actually what gave me the freedom to move to Nashville and start working for Storybrand. So the current job that I have, which is my favorite job in the world that I've ever had, came from leaving a secure place that I had reached a certain level. I was never going to be president of a university. I had kind of reached, I probably would get, maybe my 3 to 5% incremental raises from then on. I had the most influence I was going to have in that position. There was no growing other than going to another university, which I had no desire to do. And I took a risk on something that had a greater reward and a greater risk. And it didn't go the way I thought it would, but I had an amazing time, and it led me to where I am today. And I would not be able to be here, which is what I do at Storybrand, is I go around and help companies, individuals and corporations clarify their message. So create a story, their story, talk about their brand, talk about what they do in a way that compels customers, because so many companies are just so close to their products that they have a hard time explaining what it is that they do in a way that compels people to engage. And so many of them are losing out to inferior products, inferior people in the marketplace because those people can communicate more clearly. And so I go around and I teach story. I teach how story works and how to create a compelling story in your marketing and messaging. And the only real reason I could do that, now I did have a communication background in public relations and marketing that I had done it, and I'd actually taught it at university, but I'm on a global stage at this point that I travel around the world and help companies. I work with very large corporations and very small corporations, individuals. And it was one of the things that gets me in the door is that I wrote for television and I worked in Hollywood. And, because it adds to my credibility of being a storyteller, where Hollywood is the highest level in our society of storytelling. right? I mean, you could be a novelist, but novelists want to get their movies made. So when you can say, no, I actually was on television, I was in movies, I've written scripts, I've been to Sundance, I've debated film in that setting, both academically and culturally. I went to Comic-Con every year, and all of these.
Oh my gosh!
That bring everything together that never would have happened had I not taken that risk and said, you know what, this 1 in a million that this television show makes it on air, and I'm pretty stable right now, but let's do this. So I'm going to bet on myself.
So we are talking about two different things that are so important. One is the mindset that you had, JJ, or that you had, and kind of that journey. And so a lot of my clients that come to me, they feel defeated if they start a business or they go into something and it doesn't work out. So I want us all to remember it's a journey, and whatever you
100%.
learn, I mean, you use all the experiences that you've had to do what you do now. What you said is, this is where I was meant to be. This is what I love the most, and it's all good. So I want to just kind of let people marinate in that. But then number two, getting to the business part. So you talked about Storybrand. So those who don't know what Storybrand is, or they're not versed in the importance of storytelling for your brand, what I love about Storybrand is they have this motto, and it is confuse, you lose. It's said on every single show. It's said on every book. It's said all the time. And that's what Storybrand is about. And so that's why the story that's going underneath is important. But before you even get there, you need to have a tagline that is super clear. And you guys always say, don't get clever. Don't be don't use too many colorful words. Just get to the point. Yep. So let's talk about that a little bit, because I think that's where a lot of people miss it. They work so hard being clever and creative, and they miss it.
And that's because a lot of the examples, this is my opinion, a lot of the examples that we have that are great branding and advertising are these giant companies like Coca-Cola and Apple. And we look at those and they're so creative. But Apple doesn't have to tell you what you do. Coke doesn't have to tell you what they do, right? We know them as global brands, and we all kind of want to have this creative, ethereal, feel-good kind of messaging because we see those huge brands do it so well. And for most of us, that actually is going to confuse people, right? Because we need to start with what is it that you actually do, and people skip right over that. So we say all the time, you can be cute and clever, but not at the expense of clarity. Like, always be clear first. Start with clarity, then move to cute and clever. And there's a reason for that, and that's because the way our brains actually work and process information. I'll kind of go through a few things real quick, but the way that our brains are designed to keep us alive. And the two primary ways that our brains do that is by helping us to focus on what helps us survive and thrive. Our brain is always looking for how do we survive and thrive. So, like when you walk into a Starbucks, you don't walk in and process every piece of data that's in front of you. You're not picking up a package and going, well, this label is cute, and this font is different, and this letter is da-da-da. Look how they shaped this A. I mean, if you started processing every piece of information and focusing on how many cracks are in the wall, how many holes are in the ceiling, you'd be stuck there all day, and you'd never get out. Our brain naturally filters out the information we don't need. It goes, oh, there's the coffee, there's the exit. Right? People are always like, when I walk into any kind of conference room or boardroom and I'm presenting, people never know how many chairs are in the room, but they always know where the exits are. It's what our brain does all the time. We're just filtering out information. Like you right now, you know where your wine glass is, and you probably know how to get some more, right? Like, that's how you're going to survive and thrive. But you don't know how many chairs are out there, how many bushes around you. Your brain just naturally ignores that. And that's because in order to process information, the second thing the brain is doing is it's trying to conserve calories. And the more information you have to process and decisions you have to make, the more calories your brain burns. So your brain's always looking for what makes us survive and thrive, and to do it in such a way that burns little calories. We try to understand things quickly, primarily because, in a very kind of just bottom line way, if the barbarians come over the hill to attack us, and we've used all our decision-making power, and we're focusing on everything around us versus the fight or flight, then we die. So our brain is doing those two things. We're looking for how do we survive and thrive, and how do we make those decisions and process that information quickly without burning too many calories. So what ends up happening with people's messaging and story, because people's story is such a buzzword, but people don't know how to tell a story, is they throw information at people that causes them to be confused, process too much information, burn too many calories, and they don't connect their product or service to people's survival and thriving. And what story does, when you actually follow the rules of story, there are rules of story that have been developed, they go all the way back to Aristotle and Plato. Like, there are rules to a story, and when you break those rules, then you actually descend into chaos and noise. It's no longer a story that flows and makes sense and helps us understand how to survive and thrive and do it clearly. It becomes noise. And that's why on our podcast, we even say, if you confuse, you lose. Noise is the enemy. And creating a clear message is the best way to grow your business, because most of us are we've got maybe a beautiful website or beautiful kind of a brand out there, but we're putting this confusing message up to a megaphone and it's not making a difference, right? It doesn't matter if you have a megaphone that gets more branding information out there, but the message you're speaking through that is confusing, it's just noise. Because we are experiencing 3,000 to 5,000 commercial messages a day. Right. And so what Storybrand does is say, this is how to tell a story, follow the rules in a way that helps people understand how you help them survive and thrive, and does it in such a way that they don't even have to burn any calories to understand it.
Okay. So JJ, tell us, how does a company or a business structure their message, their story, to not be confusing?
Yeah. So, this is all based on even screenwriting principles and story framework. And there's different structures. In the Storybrand framework, we've really boiled it down to that there are 7 elements of every good story. And I'll say it first in the context of like a movie, and then kind of translate that to a brand. So the 7 elements are that you start with a character. That might seem obvious, but what's important about that character in a movie is you need to know immediately, within 9 minutes of the start of a movie, what that character wants. It has to be clear, and it can't be 50 things. Jason Bourne can't want to know who he is and know his history, but also want to open a bakery and run a marathon and that becomes a horrible movie. We tune out because we have to burn too many calories to follow the storylines. So the character has to want one thing. First element. Second is that character encounters a problem. The entire story is about that character overcoming a problem. And the story is not good unless there is the problem. If basically, like, Liam Neeson's daughter gets kidnapped for the 8th time, and he gets a phone call that she's fine in London and nothing's going on, she just wants him to come over and visit because it's a joke. There's no problem to overcome. That's a boring movie. They spend the rest of the movie shopping, right? It's just a boring movie. And in story, there's a couple levels of problem. The 2 most important are the external problem and the internal problem. So even if Liam Neeson has to overcome this kidnapping of his daughter, he has to get his daughter back, most of us can't identify with that story because we probably haven't had somebody kidnapped in our family that we need to rescue. Right. But we can identify with maybe feeling like you're not good enough or scared to protect your family. So the external problem in a movie always manifests an internal problem. The movie is never about a bomb that's about to explode. It's about the person's feelings about disarming the bomb. It's about their relationship with their father. Maybe their father died in a bomb accident earlier that was their fault. It's always about the internal. So the character encounters a problem, has to overcome both an external and internal problem. There's another layer, but I won't get into that now. It's called philosophical. Then the hero meets a guide. We know that the hero can't overcome the problem on their own, that somebody who has been there before, done this, already conquered this problem, comes in and helps them. So in Star Wars, it's Yoda to Luke's hero, or Obi-Wan Kenobi is the guide, or Gandalf, or Haymitch in Hunger Games. There's always a guide who comes in and helps the hero win the day with empathy and authority. They've They understand what they're feeling, and they've also been there before and won the day or helped other people win the day. Then the guide gives them a plan. It's a very clear plan that they have to follow to win the day. Then there is a moment when the main character is called to action. It's a clear moment. The hero never has to act on their own. They won't act on their own unless there is a moment. That's why there's always like bombs that are going to go off in 60 minutes. Because if the bomb was going to go off in 3 years, it's not, there's like a clear call to action. It has to happen now. You have to act. And then we know what the stakes are in the story, what success looks like, and what failure looks like. We know that this story can end horribly and everybody could die, or we know what that everybody's happy and success looks like in the end. We have a vision of what that can be. So those are the 7 elements: a character who wants something, who encounters a problem, who meets a guide, who gives them a plan, calls them to action, and then we know what success and failure looks like.